Welcome to the Kelly Sullivan Walden Show, where we explore nighttime dreams, daytime desires, and the best ways to transform the tragic into magic. Because let's face it, we all dream, we all have our blessings, and we all have our challenges, myself included. And I don't want any of us to take any of those things lying down, if you know what I mean. I just wrote a book entitled A Crisis is a Terrible Thing to Waste. I'm excited to explore the topic with you, whether it relates to your waking or sleeping dreams, because we're dreaming all the time, people. So let's make it the best dream possible. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. Welcome to the show. I am so excited about today's episode. This is going to be very different than the conversations I normally have with you all. Today's conversation is going to be a little political, but I promise you it will be juicy. And I typically don't talk about politics on this show. The last time I did, I had Marianne Williamson on, and it was I was shocked at the controversy, and I'm grateful. I want her to be our president, but I like to unify people. I like to bring them together. So I find conversations about politics to be difficult, and I am not the best navigator of those. So I brought in Stephen Dinan, who I think is very, very skilled at this conversation. So Stephen Dinan, most of you know, he is the founder and CEO of the Shift Network. I've heard of that. Yeah. And he's a member of TLC, the Transformational Leadership Council, and Evolutionary Leaders. The Shift Network has served over 3 million people worldwide, with customers in 170 countries. It delivers virtual summits, courses, and trainings featuring over 250 core faculty, of which I am proud to be one, and 3,000 thought leaders in domains as diverse as spirituality, holistic health, psychology, shamanism, energy healing, sound healing, qigong, and I'm going to throw in dreamwork. He is the author of Sacred America, Sacred World, and Radical Spirit. So I welcome Stephen, first of all. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And I met this young woman last night, Alyssa Marie, who I was we were at a conversation at a book event for a book called American Shield by Sergeant Aquino Gonell. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing his name right. American Shield. And it was all about the January 6th insurrection. He was one of the policemen who was brutally attacked and had to testify. And he's been through so much, and he is truly a hero. And it was such a conversation. And sitting right behind me was Alyssa, and she and I were both an active part of the conversation. I turned around to look at her. She had fire in her eyes, and she had so much to say. And after the conversation, Alyssa and we kind of gathered off in the corner with my friend Karina, and we were talking about politics, and she was saying some things, and I thought, you know what, this girl needs to meet Stephen Dinan, because I think he's the hope that she's looking for. So Alyssa is 27. She's from Los Angeles, and she is an entrepreneur, graduate of Loyola Marymount. And she is an entrepreneur who operates 2 businesses in media and in the pet care industry. And she is an amazing human that I just met, and I want to welcome you. So unmute Alyssa and please join the conversation. That was a lot. So Stephen, I just have to tell you, I gobbled your book up, and I've known you as the Shift guy, the guy that started the Shift. And I'm shocked to find out and I'm not surprised, but how deep your past goes into politics, and what a visionary you are. So let's talk about what What inspired you to write your book, Sacred America, Sacred World?
Well, I have to say that I wasn't always involved in politics, partially for reasons that you had enumerated there, is that it can be so combative and so divisive and difficult to navigate for people who are more sensitive. And I would consider myself a fairly sensitive person as well. And that's part of why I've created the Shift Network, is that there's a lot of people who have a deeper level of feeling, sensitivity to the world around them, to emotions, to intuitions, and that a lot of times those people end on a spiritual path, and they haven't necessarily found a good avenue to bring themselves into the political process, partially because of the level of polarization and intensity. So, and I think that really does a disservice to our democracy, because what you need in a democracy is the wisest voices to influence the whole. Is because when you're making, effectively, politics is about how do we resolve our challenges collectively. So you don't want the bullies, you don't want the bullies and the bluster or the lowest common denominator to make those decisions that affect millions of lives. And so what I was trying to do with this book, in many ways, was to apply what I have gotten from decades of spiritual work and meditation and different transformational modalities. How do we bring that same kind of a transformational lens to politics? And so I intentionally wrote the book with a goal of having it be endorsed and readable on left and right. And I did get that. I actually got the founder of the Log Cabin Republicans to endorse it. There's another Republican who endorsed it. Even though I tend to be a progressive Democrat by nature, I wanted to engage the conversation, trying to like point to some of the things that unify us, like sacred principles that are embedded in the Constitution and our founding documents. And also there's sort of a sense of a larger mission, because we can get so caught up in partial agendas, which are important sometimes to advocate for, that we lose this sense of a kind of a shared co-creative mission that is ultimately, I think, at the heart of what America, why we even exist as a country. Is like, I believe that we are sort of here to lead towards larger wholes. We're here to demonstrate the coming together of the world's cultures and populations and perspectives, and be able to have like a healthy, functioning democracy that is built out of that. And that's, we're one of the most diverse countries in the world, and we have a lot of different challenges to integrate that. But at our best, we are basically almost like a leading edge of how the world comes together as a whole, because we have all these different cultures and traditions and perspectives coming together. And so it's really important that we figure out how to apply consciousness principles, spiritual principles, to evolve how we engage democracy. And it has to come from this, first of all, a stance of seeing not enemies and opposition, but you see other divine beings, that you see people have perspectives, they've got things that they really want to advance, but at their core, that there's, if we have a respect for the dignity and the divinity and every other being, that creates a different foundation for relating. And I think that what happens is that you can start to create conversations that lead to better synthesis. So even though I've always been a more progressive Democrat and backed people like Marianne or Dennis Kucinich, I've tended to back a
Right.
lot of the more idealistic spiritual people on a presidential level and also on a state level. But I also recognize that I often tell the story, which was also in the book, of how when I first got together with my wife, her father was like a kind of a chest thumping tough Republican,
Right.
and it was after 9/11 I wrote an article about fierce love, and not essentially just going into a vindictive mode, but really operating from love for the whole. And he totally went to battle with me, and he was just like, put on your flak jacket, and he was doing email warfare with me with his friends. And so so initially there was this kind of polarized energy, and I didn't really engage the polarized energy. I didn't sort of like, I wasn't insulting with him or anything like that, but he was definitely did that with me. And so I had to kind of like go through a bit of that and get to where we actually ended up with like really great connection. And even though he was much more conservative, much more business focused, I asked him to mentor me in some of the
Ooh.
things that he was really good at, and he ended up being like a good mentor for certain principles that I've learned how to apply in Shift. So part of what I took away from that is that a lot of the idealism of the more progressive liberal side, I've never abandoned it, but I've seasoned it or balanced it with like a deeper understanding of conservative values and principles and practices, because it's almost like there's a cross training. It's like we get good at
Yes.
one side of the equation, but we're not as good at the other. And so I think there's a learning opportunity when we can really engage people who are very different, and out of that, there's a kind of a higher synthesis and better ideas that emerge. And so I'm applying a similar kind of principle right now. I've been working on a series. It's looking at the war in the Middle East, and I'm trying to get
Mm-hmm.
people who are critiquing my articles from both sides, who are
Ooh.
like more strongly Israeli, pro-Israeli, and more strongly pro-Palestinian, because like I want to be able to speak and write in a way that can actually touch the humanity beyond the positionality, and it's hard, and I can
Yeah.
tell you already there's like we have like somebody who's like launching a campaign against us as a company because we're not sufficiently pro-Palestinian, and it's sort of like, well, I'm anti-war and we're trying to be a healing influence, but we're not just sort of taking one side of the equation, because as soon as you take one side of the equation and you just engage in a kind of a more combative stance with the other side, then it's just a power struggle, and it tends to the forces of dehumanization escalate. And what we need is more of a rehumanization and a
Yeah.
re-establishing of a human respectful connection. And so trying to take a stand for that in a combative political arena or a combative war situation is very hard. But I think it's an important function that those of us on a spiritual path who've done more inner work can be called into, because without the wisdom voices, you just tend to regress. And so wisdom voices usually have some level of respectful, loving um, dialogue that can open, where people can begin to see each other, thaw a bit, and open to the possibility that there people are actually on the same team rather than on two opposing teams. So I like to think of, I'm on team humanity. I'm not on team Israel or team Gaza, or I'm on team
Right.
humanity. I'm not on team Democrat or team Republican for the most part. With politics,
Yeah.
I tend to lean a little bit, I tend to vote Democratic and everything, but I actually went to the Republican National Convention in 2016 when
Wow.
Trump was nominated. So I was actually in the arena when he was nominated. And
Whoa.
I spoke at this purple tent, and I was in a panel with people like Grover Norquist, and people are my ideological opposite in many ways, but just trying to like find like
Yeah.
how can we engage in a way that's actually respectful, that's human, that's building bridges and friendships, so that we don't devolve into the warfare psychology that actually just diminishes things for everybody.
Ooh. You and Van Jones, like being in that, the messy truth and the being
He is
in the middle
brilliant at it.
is,
Van
yeah.
is he's next level.
Oh, yeah, yeah, he is. So, Alyssa, I want to bring you in and where so what happened last night was from my perspective, and fill me in where I'm missing anything. When I heard you speak, I was listening to you at this event, and I imagined that you were representing a whole body of people, young people, people that have also been disillusioned in our country. I mean, in the like Black Lives Matter and all the crazy stuff that's going on. And then also the gentleman who was talking, the author of American Shield, he was talking about the injustice that's happened to him. I mean, the very people that he was trying to defend, putting his life on the line for, turn against him and were diminishing what he was doing and calling him a captor, being a police. I mean, it's just the injustice was out, just so infuriating. And my sense as you were talking, because somebody else was saying half of America didn't vote for Trump, so just know that. But there was this sense of, we're like, America, is it even like, what is this America that we're in, and that we feel that can we even be proud of this place? So in hearing what Stephen just had to say, with regards to what I mentioned to you was about being evolutionary, not necessarily just revolutionary. How's all this landing on you? What is happening in you? I can feel that a lot's percolating. So, what's your
Yeah.
perspective on this so far, Alyssa?
I really appreciate you bringing me in the conversation because I have a lot of things that I can add and I can affirm. But also I can like challenge as
Yeah.
well. And
Hmm.
I appreciate everything that that you just mentioned, and a lot of things that you're saying, I've over here was like on mute, like yes, like yes, like someone gets it. Um, because I think most importantly, in order to understand, um, and be able to act on that understanding, there has to be like a certain connectivity within like your inner self, as he was kind of speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll speak a little bit to my own like spiritual journey to like get me to the point of where I can have the receptivity that I have, and then of course like the attitude that I have. But I would say my spiritual journey has been my entire life. I grew up in very faith-based organizations, institutions, household, um, and just understanding faith in general, and then as it relates to like, of course, like on a disconnected level in terms of like an institution versus like a personal level,
Mm-hmm.
as in my own relationship with my own inner being, and then my own
Mm-hmm.
relationship with like a higher source.
Right.
And as I began to, but also continue to work on and develop that relationship, a lot of other things, of course, because that's just like the nature of what happens when you become more spiritually in tuned.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a snowball effect. You open yourself up, and for me, it's God, but for anyone else, a higher source
Right.
continues to reveal more
Mm-hmm.
things as you stay open and you stay,
Mm.
wanting to learn. So that's a little bit of a synopsis of like what has led me to understand, and then also like have empathize
Mm-hmm.
with the reason why a lot of other people just might not be there yet themselves. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it is super radical, as you just mentioned, to
Mm-hmm.
empower the individual, to empower them to develop a relationship with a higher source, and to depend less on like what the government is telling us to do or what institutions, because that again is a little bit more easier to control in the simplest way I can put it, right? So instead of empowering the individual, which gives the individual their own ability to think for themselves
Mm-hmm.
and ability to, you know, just again, like ascend to a higher power, and then be able to be vulnerable with people who don't have the exact same experiences as you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have the only way to bridge a lot of the gaps that we find in our, you know, collective societal problems. It is just the inability, and as we spoke about this yesterday, to be vulnerable,
Mm.
right? Of
Ooh,
course,
honest.
yeah, to be
Yeah.
honest, to be authentic, to say, yeah, you hurt me, and like, how can we get past it? That's like just in interpersonal
Mm.
relationships. That's the only reason. That's the only way that you could bridge the gap. So
Ooh.
of course, it's the same um, process with the collective society. And
Mm.
I think in this country, there has been, and not this country alone, just historically, but I can only speak to my experience as an American,
Mm-hmm.
and just even deeper than just being an American. For me personally, I'm an African American, I'm a Black woman. So, me speaking to what I know on that, but just
Mm-hmm.
also as an American, the history in this country is so fractured
Mm-hmm.
because the foundation is so fractured. And then we
Mm.
try to build on a fractured foundation. And I think anyone who understands architecture or just basic physics can understand that that's just not ever going to be sustainable. So it's
Well, let
inevitable to
me,
implode. Okay.
yes. So, no, this brings up a great point. And with that, Stephen, you talk about the 7.0. So, you kind of, what I loved, because I totally agree, and I've been with you in that same thought. Like, we started on such a, I mean, our founding fathers had slaves. Like, wait a minute. This is, it's
Yeah,
like
we have
corrupt right out of the
genocide.
gate.
Genocide and slavery are definitely not great foundations to build a noble democracy on. And so when we haven't really done the deep work to clear all that either.
Correct. So one thing that you talked about though was kind of these steps. I don't know if it's the human 7.0, or can you talk about those those stages. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But instead of kind of going through sort of each stage,
Yeah,
but it's more like there's like, just
this
the
evolution.
principle of is that our country is evolving just like a program would, where you have like, program 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and we get
Yes.
more mature at each stage.
Yeah.
And then there's often things that are neglected. So like some of the deep reparation work around slavery is sort of still undone, and some of the deep reparation work with the native
Native.
populations that were victims of genocide is still undone. And
Mhm.
so those create distortion patterns in what's, unless they get addressed in each kind of upgrade, if you will. And so I
Mhm.
think we are underway with some of the addressing some of those. There's more understanding, it's less in the shadows, there's more people who are doing deep healing work and deep truth telling work around that. And so I that and I so what I see is like the 7.0 in many ways is sort of like that's as we start to flower as an embodiment of the sort of the e pluribus unum, of out of many one, that we are sort of a diverse society, and that each culture, religion, tribe has its place of honor within that. That it's like, and that it's a global. It's like we're a miniature of the global village, and so, and then we've had at different stages. There needed to be sort of a coming to terms with what is the shadow side? How is one class oppressing another? How is one race oppressing another? How are we marginalizing gay people and like that? There's a lot of things that we've needed to sort of go through, and I think of
Mm.
those as sort of upgrades in America as an entity, and that we're all engaging in that process. And we have to hear voices like yours, Alyssa, and to really listen to what's the next generation. Because there's like, for me, I grew up, I had a friend who came out to me as gay, and like he was totally felt like had no place in the world. He ended up committing suicide. So I took on like really like in my
Oh,
generation more around sort of like really championing gay people and LGBTQ, and now it's much more like fluid gender identities and sort of going, and that's sort of a little bit like, I mean, I'm kind of part
evolution.
of that way, but it's like an evolution that's like, in a way, it's like kind of clear that's the next evolution that I'm not as much in the heart of. And and that sort of fluidity of gender understanding is something that's like a new thing, where we've had kind of a patriarchal bias and a sort of a masculine feminine polarity that is no longer serving the next generation. And so, whether it's the gender fluidity or how to integrate AI in a respectful way, it's like, some of these things are kind of like more the next wave coming up. And but I just see it through the lens of like that the project is to keep evolving our democracy and keep evolving our country, so that we are more conscious, that we are more reflective of our highest truths, and that we really embody our deepest mission in every way.
I do have a question or something
Yeah.
to retort to
Yeah.
that. Recently, personal antidote. I was invited to a city council. I live in District, I think 10, city council meeting. And they were, of course, I love to talk about anything. So getting me, to get my opinions out. And I was speaking with a young lady who was kind of helping me understand more about my local government. Just because, she was running for city council. And I went back and forth for hours and debated her. And I, asked her, this was a young Latina um, candidate. And I was asking her, how much faith does she have in the current system? Right.
Ooh.
And as
Ooh.
you guys are having the conversation about like, amending and evolving our current democracy, I question goes back to like my initial statement where it is like, I'm not saying or speaking as a collective for my own generation, but I do see patterns and I do see certain things that I think generationally, and I'm not going to speak for, again, my entire generation, but I can speak on, I'm on the cusp of like millennial Gen Z. But one thing that I do see commonly is that there is a distrust in the system
Yeah.
because fundamentally it
Mm.
is, again, fundamentally fractured. So I question, like, if it is fundamentally fractured, how is it possible to evolve if we're not you know, if it's the system, and that's what I was trying to talk or kind of allude to in my questioning last night with the author, because he mentioned that he had faith in the American system. He was coming
Yes.
as a Dominican immigrant to America, and he enlisted in the army because he felt like it would be a almost like a golden ticket to the American dream. And he was sold, as we spoke about, the illusionary you know, promise that if you come here and you follow these rules and this is what's going to happen. And again, I think as things post COVID, just so many other, you know, global, but of course national, I'll say, disasters and catastrophes have kind of happened, and we've all been affected by it without any healing or closure. The question I do have is like, okay, clearly we all can understand, well, not everyone, because it's not really affecting everyone the same way, but a huge majority of us can understand and look at it and say this system was not it's doing as it was designed to do, which was to protect and to really, you know, protect but help, just for lack of a better and more descriptive word, a certain group of people, and to keep it in that status quo. So the majority of us are working daily, tirelessly, to keep this system intact under the guise that we will attain that protection.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So let me just jump in here, and then Stephen, I've got a question for you. I think what you just brought up is at the heart of what I wanted us to talk about. And I'll just speak for myself. I'm an idealist. I'm a visionary. I'm a dreamer. I live in that world, and I see things perfect. And then reality happens, and it can be devastating. And there's some part of me when, I mean, this is a horrible analogy, but I feel like in the past I've been like the little girl that discovers there's no Santa Claus, and I'm heartbroken. And it's like, I don't want to play here then. I'm going to take my toys and go home. I don't even want my toys. Keep them. This is broken and I'm out of here. And I've been there before. I've been in that extreme. And I feel like my own maturity, and Stephen, you talk about this to some degree in the book. There's something about, okay, this is a mess, and yet here I am. And I have particular gifts and skills. Maybe I can't fix everything in this time, but maybe I can move an inch. Maybe I can do something, and maybe I need to stop making everybody else out there, the elected officials, my Santa Claus. Maybe I need to stop making them God. Maybe I need to grow up and do my tiny little part and stop whining and just do my piece. Because what if the whining gets in the way of me doing my piece? And what if I just become a bigger part of the problem? Okay, Stephen. I
There's a lot of different threads I could respond to.
You didn't say it like that.
But I think
you said it much more eloquently than I just did.
Yeah. What do I want to say right now? I think that it's sometimes there's a self-protective instinct we have, is if it feels like something is too hard to change, then we want to kind of be disillusioned with it, or just dismiss it, or not take responsibility, or say, oh, it's, screw it. And
it's all corrupt, right?
And I think that, I totally understand where that's coming from, and it can, sometimes you got to give yourself some space to just say, forget it. But I think that if we can each take responsibility for a little piece of that evolution, and sometimes bigger pieces too, it's like, we don't want to assume our piece is small. Sometimes, individuals have huge impacts on the course of history too, and evolution of things. And so I think what it's more just like really trying to meditate and tune in with like what's ours to do, and how can we be putting our energy, attention, and awareness in a way that doesn't burn us out, but that is just like reflective. Like, I don't think that I'm necessarily going to stop the war in the Middle East, but I feel like it's important that I bring my best intelligence forward. I just felt like, I want to write things, I want to speak to things in a way that hopefully can help to nudge things in the right direction, which is towards more understanding, more peace, more healing of historical trauma, and more of a deep respect for other beings, and that's my piece of the equation, to be a voice and a writer, and to advocate for that and try to influence people. And it may not work. It may, it's like when I did this book in 2016, I went on the
Yeah.
road show, and then it's like, and then it became
Pre-COVID.
the Trump era, and I was just like, oh my God. But so, I feel like but I needed to put that out there, because
Yeah.
it was a statement of my soul of like, what do I want to see? And when we put out the vision that we want to
Yeah.
see, it starts to build more momentum, because sometimes the critiques actually sabotage our energy. And the critiques are valuable because you need to understand what's broken
Yeah.
in the system, but then it's like translating that into a vision of what's better. That's
Yeah.
what starts to kind of create more positive momentum. So it's more of the creative, generative ideas that we want to get to. And sometimes you got to go through the critique and the disillusionment to get there. But it's like, the more
Yes.
we sort of ultimately land on what's going to make things better and be a champion for that, and work with our elected officials. And it's like we've done lobbying, peace lobbying with our elected officials, an example. And then I feel like when we did that around when we were sort of close to war with Iran, and we were trying to like do the nuclear deal, and we did lobbying around that, I was like, we had like some small voice and impact in that system. And so it's ultimately more empowering if we see that we want to put ourselves on the good side of history, the evolution, and we
Yes.
want to sort of select those things where we have a unique angle, a unique gift, and that we can contribute, and that people can get behind, because the critiques or the disillusionment sort of ultimately are more about self-protection and not wanting to be disappointed a lot of times. And
I'm in
sometimes
Right.
you have to kind of be
wholehearted
willing
agreement.
sometimes to be disappointed when you're working on things that are the right thing and it doesn't work out.
Yes.
1,000%. I'm in wholehearted agreement that like it is so much more productive to focus on positive energy, because positive energy, of course, the momentum and the force of the momentum and the intensity of the momentum is so much like the light drives out the dark, and essentially, and I totally 100% agree. But then I do, and again, not to constantly retort, but also just to like expand the conversation, because I think it's just so important. I think, and I'm going to speak personally because that's the best that I can speak on. I
Yes.
come from personally within my own self, despite certain oppressions that I do face. I do come from a certain level of privilege, right? And I'm understanding that there's a lot of people in this country, and a lot of people who are affected in this society who do not. So I think there's a certain part where like the reason why revolutions are successful in certain ways is because people are fired up, and like I know how difficult it is for me with the level of hard work and privilege I did receive coming into this world, and how just difficult it could be for me at times under this system. So I can only imagine people who come from far less than I do. And I'm saying like it could be super easy like to say that like, oh, I just do my own part. But I think there's a certain point, and I think this could be, like I'm saying, like a generational divide that's going to come in, because I think the generation that I'm in and the generation below me, we've experienced so many just catastrophes, like I said, that seemed like this wasn't like it's normal for us, but it seemed like older generations did not go through this. Like when I was in the fifth, or like when I was in kindergarten, excuse me, I grew up in the DC Maryland area, and I was severely affected by 9/11. And also at the same year of 9/11, I grew up, like I said, in the DC, there's a DC sniper. So just growing up with so many different, like constant, just things to constantly be, whether it's school shootings, pandemics, like literally when I graduated college, COVID happened. My early 20s and early adulthood completely changed. And I'm not saying that I'm a victim. I'm not like that. Please don't get that impression. But I'm saying that like when we coming from a younger generation and speaking on our behalf, it's like, okay, if all these things are constantly happening to us, we could be a little bit apathetic. I'd say we could be a
Yes.
little bit nihilistic in
Yep.
thinking that, like, okay, clearly something's not working here, this
Yeah.
system. So if
Yeah.
we can just, I think, since we have a little bit less nationalism, I'm going to be very blunt with that too. A lot of my generation has a
Mm-hmm.
that's why, like, voting for generation, like, you know, we're not as likely to go vote. There takes
Right.
a huge, you know, there's a lot of campaigning to motivate us to go out to the polls and voting and using our own rights within that. Because again, so many people, I'm sure you could go on the streets and do one of those TikTok interviews and ask young people, like, what discourages you from voting, and they're saying, like, well, I don't believe my vote matters.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it did, what is it going to amount to?
Right.
Because if the
Exactly.
system, like I keep reiterating, if
Yeah.
the system is so fractured, this little, you
Yeah.
know, progress we're making towards it, if we're the future and we have younger generations coming up in the future under the same system that we keep intact, and it's not serving any of us,
Yeah.
what is the point? It's hegemonic. We are giving it importance. We are putting on, you know, what the system entails. So that means that we could completely reimagine it. And I think
Mm.
a lot of this younger
Ooh.
generation, I think older generations,
Mm.
you know, that's a fear. That's a fear point. It's a trigger point to think that, like, okay, America could be reimagined. But a lot of these conversations with people of my generation and below, that's what those conversations are getting at. Where it's like,
Well,
I'm
okay, when is the revolution
let's
starting? When are we striking? I think even
I'm
like
100% aligned with re-envisioning,
reimagining. Yeah.
reimagining, and I do think that there's a little distinction that I make in the book, and I have a chapter on this around between revolution and evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you're young, and I certainly this was true for, is that there is such a sense of palpable difference between the vision of what you know could be possible and what is, that there's almost like an urgency to kind of like overthrow the old and birth the new.
Mm-hmm.
But historically it just doesn't tend to work very well. Like a lot of times revolutions tend to regress because there's like an energy of destruction sometimes involved in certain, like there's an overthrow, there's a disrespect sometimes from the of what went before.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I understand the impulse, but it's sort of like, I think that generally when we're
But I
talking about
question,
big
do you think that's a
collectives.
part of the process? Not to be sorry to
Let's
interrupt,
just
but
let
do you
him
Oh,
think,
finish his sentence and then
okay,
just
let's
complete
get
the
right
thought.
back to
So
it.
I see this, or generally the way evolution, like the way we tend to get better over time is we're building on the past. And so the revolutionary energy is to kind of overthrow it all, but it's actually hard to build things from totally ground up. And sometimes you can really go backwards as a society. So it's more like we're causing the next evolution of our society, and that it's like, and that tends to create less fear in the other side, people who are more naturally wired to preserve institutions and traditions and cultures. And so the revolution feels like, oh, I'm like, there's a visceral fear, like I'm going to be harmed in some way by this revolutionary energy. Whereas I find that evolutionary language is a little bit more inclusive of those who are naturally predisposed to preservation. And I think that that's, if you look at like just a healthy system of any kind, it's like there's usually some balance between things that are changing things and things that are kind of preserving. Like our homeostasis is really important in our body in order to stay alive. And if you throw it too far out of whack, you die. So you kind of have to, like, you know, societies as a whole tend to kind of more gradually go through an evolutionary process. And so
Ooh.
it doesn't mean that it's like there's like a no to revolutionary energy. It's more just like what I've found is at 54 now is like being more patient sometimes about how long it can take for the society to really evolve, and also to respect sometimes the forces that are trying to preserve the status quo, because they have their own function in the society. And if we can respect that they have a function, it's important, then there's less polarization sometimes.
So I'm going to jump in for a sec. So I tend to, because I'm a dream person, and this
Yeah.
this show tends to be about dreams. Um, one of the founding principles of dreamwork is to look at everyone and everything in the dream as an aspect of the dreamer. And
Nice.
of
Yeah.
course, I prefer when Mother Teresa shows up in my dream and I get to say, wow, there's the Mother Teresa part of me. hey, that's cool. But when there's a monster in my dream, of course my ego says, well, that's not me. That's someone else. That's something else. But but transformation, even alchemy inside me happens when I say, damn, I don't like this part of me, but it showed up for me to do something with, and it's within me. The monster is within me, the hero is within me, the victim is, it's all here. And that doesn't mean stay insular. It doesn't mean don't do something, but I think it means get myself as clear and as alchemized as possible, turn my own energy that's misaligned into clarity, and then I'm a better channel to be able to hear the voice of God, the universe, what my place is, and act on that. So thinking of what's missing, what's broken in this world, because yes, it's broken, and my heart has been broken over this as well. It feels like it's a body. It's like it's my own body, and it's as if there are certain, it's like as if there's liver cancer in a body. Cancel, don't wish that on anybody here, and myself especially. But if I had liver cancer, it wouldn't be like, well, let's just kill the person, let me just kill myself because I have cancer. It's like, wait a minute, let me heal, let me bring in some alkaline, let me do some things that can offset that. And oftentimes, many times, there's these spontaneous remission situations that happen because I'm filling myself up, but that doesn't mean denying what the problem is. And one thing you both said that I think needs to be highlighted, because I can sometimes in the past be all too quick to jump over this. I think there does need to be a mourning period. There needs to be, like, I love the fact, I haven't been to these yet, but I want to go. There are these rage rooms where you can go and break things, and you can, like, I'm so pissed off, I'm so hurt, I'm so sad. This is crushing. We need a place for that. We need to, like, move that energy out and give ourselves a break, give ourselves some space to be devastated and to be disillusioned and to be hurt. And then what can we do? What's our little piece to do? Or what is that little piece that might turn into a big piece? Last two things. Margaret Mead said, who said that a small group of thoughtful individuals can't change the world. It's the only kind that ever has. And then Buckminster Fuller was known for talking about oh my God, what's it called? You know what I'm talking about? The little rudder. I mean, it's going to come to
The
me. The
trim
word's going
tab,
to
trim
come.
tab.
Trim tab. Thank you. The trim tab is the tiniest part of a ship, but it's the little teeny part that turns the entire ship around. I mean, it's tiny. So, and he would have these shirts, everybody would walk around saying, I am trim tab. Like, you don't have to be big. You don't have to know everybody. You don't have to be rich. He wasn't rich. He wasn't anybody special. And yet he had a big part. And anyway, so I think it does come back to we do need to grieve, we do need to mourn. And then when we're ready, let's do our little part that may turn into something big. And I think to beware of becoming so disillusioned, and I'm saying this to myself, I'm not just saying this to anyone out there. We need to not just give in to the disillusionment and allow that to become its own force that can kind of be counterproductive to the reason that we decided to incarnate here at all. Okay, I pass it back. Who wants it? Take the ball.
I loved a lot of things you said. I do think it's giving space for the full range of emotions to work their way through your system. Really good
Yeah.
wisdom in that. And because it's like, when there's unprocessed emotion in us that is
Mm-hmm.
behind what we're saying and doing, people tend to pick up on it and they will react to that, even if we're not consciously intending. And so
Yeah.
it's harder to hold that higher ground if we're sort of like still like, still have something's not metabolized or not kind of worked with or honored.
Right.
And so I think that there's deep wisdom, and I like the dream analogy of sort of like all the characters have their sort of holy function, if you will, within the
Yes.
dream. And so if we extrapolate that to real life,
Yes.
it's like, yeah, and that's kind of the part of the spiritual foundation, I think, of respecting the divinity in every other being. So it's sort of even people who seem I've had experiences, even though, you know, like I can watch what Trump does and I'm just like appalled a lot of the time. Like they've had experiences in deep meditation or where I'm like, oh, he's actually really part of this next evolution. He's catalyzing it by embodying many of the things that we need to outgrow. And like I can get frustrated, annoyed with that, and hate him sometimes, or and then have to kind of work with that. But it's like he's a character who's playing out some role in the larger evolution on the planet. And
Yes,
and so it
exactly.
doesn't mean not to sort of work against what he's doing, but it does mean it's like it's less kind of like there's less angst in like the fact that he's there. It's more like, oh, this is it's like a
He's
character
playing
in a
his role.
play who's playing out his
Absolutely.
role, and we have to use that as a
Mhm.
catalyst to kind of like mature mature our society, mature our civilization, and not just sort of like, you know, try to just, you know, flush a certain part of society down the toilet. It's more like, okay, he's speaking for a certain segment of people, and it's like we have to
Mhm.
try to understand that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mentioned that last night. When we were at our book event, a lot of the rhetoric was um very, very strongly against Trump and Republicans. And the question I posed and what I said was, well, you know, a lot of the hatred and vitriol we're throwing at them is
Mm.
unproductive
Mm.
because similar to like similar things that you just mentioned, he is kind of symbolic for obviously a greater issue here. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not him. A lot of people and a lot of you know, well, on both sides, everyone wants to blame everyone. And as you mentioned, there's the blame game is um, just keeping us stagnant. You know, it's keeping us,
Yeah.
as you said, disillusioned and keeping us kind of distracted
Mm.
from what is really like getting to the core of
Mm.
what needs to be addressed.
Ooh.
And I think we don't always, again, because of the discomfort, you even spoke about like, yeah, it's good to look, and I think it's a part of the healing process. Whenever, you know, you heal a wound, sometimes the pain comes up to the surface. And that's kind of what's happened here. As you know,
Mhm.
I do want to have
Yes,
faith and
exactly.
understanding that there is a higher
Mm-hmm.
source who keeps things stabilized and in control beyond my own understanding, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is a testament of the healing that is underway because yeah, we need to address that there is, you know, a certain hatred or certain feelings or
Mm-hmm.
certain underlying, you know, beliefs that a lot of people, I think, living in a Obama administration definitely made a lot of people believe we were more progressive than we actually
Yes,
were.
exactly.
And, you know, I grew up, I mean, I was born 96. So I grew up mostly under an Obama administration, a very progressive to me at the time world.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there was like things going on, catastrophes I mentioned, but it seemed a lot more stable and secure. And it seemed like there was
Right.
a lot more um,
Yeah.
tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, what
Mm.
happened afterwards threw a lot of people for on the complete other side of the scale and threw everyone for a loop. But that was understandable if you understand things at this, you know, higher level that we're speaking at. You can
Right.
understand that that was in response to just like the change and the shift in
Yes.
society. It was inevitable that there was going to be a response to people who were not ready for that progression.
Exactly. Oh,
That's kind of coming
amen.
back to why
Mm.
it's like if we think of things in evolutionary terms, it's like
Exactly.
it takes a
Cycles.
while for large scales of people to really grow in their consciousness. And so it's
Exactly.
sort of like we can kind of try to force things a lot faster, but it's all there's kind of an inchworm quality sometimes. And so I agree. Like I cried the night. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful
Me
nights
too.
just watching Obama when the night he won, and it was just like I just felt like, oh, we've kind of come to the promised land, and then it's like, well, no, there's a lot of stuff that we need to still go
Yep.
through and
Pendulum.
work through, and it's not it's not an overnight business to change a
Mhm.
country or change the consciousness of large groups of people.
Oh
And I
my
think that's
God.
why I mentioned when I first started of understanding and having the understanding that not everyone is at this level. So understanding that not everyone is able to be tolerant and like speak even just at the level that we're speaking at right now and have these
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
because you're right. It's an individual journey of empowerment.
Yeah, what's interesting is, I mean, I remember when I was doing the book tour with my last book, which or the Sacred America, Sacred World book, and that there were people who said, "Oh, I gave your book to my brother-in-law, who's like diehard Republican, and we've never been able to talk about politics, and read it, and it's like we actually had like a really good conversation and kind of came back together." And
Ah,
so even if it
that's
wasn't
great.
like, wasn't like millions of people, but it was like, and there were
Yet.
thousands of people that
Yeah.
had some impact from just trying to speak in a way
Mhm.
that's calling out the better angels of our nature, the deeper principles of our democracy, what really unites us, and how we can start to kind of like work through some of the traumas that are unresolved, and some of the schisms that are in our collective. And yeah, it was, for me, it's just a personal process that turned into a
Mhm.
book, and then I went on a journey, and that inspired and touched other people. So I think each one of us has the power to attempt to have conversations at that level, to
Yeah.
be a bridge, and to try to like be a bridge of understanding, even if we hold strongly to what we want to see and the vision we want to see
Mhm.
and the direction we want to see. It's easier for people to receive if they feel like they're respected
Validated.
in their core dignity as human beings.
And
Yeah.
this is why I am I'm really, really grateful for your book, Stephen, because I feel like it is an olive branch. It's a connective tool. And in this divisive world, we need as many of those as possible. You articulate it so well. I mean, you're incredibly thoughtful. You're not just idealistic, but you've also got a plan for every vision you articulate. You're like, and this is how we do it down to the letter. And so I think anybody who's watching this on either side of the aisle, or if you have somebody in your life that you love that it's been tense with because you're polarizing, this is one of those books that you're going to want to buy. I mean, this is, if you're watching in real time, we're getting near the holidays. This would be a great
Mhm.
Christmas present for those family members that are hard to talk to, or maybe give it to them before Christmas so you could talk to them around the Thanksgiving table or whatever that
Mhm.
is. It's a great tool. And another thing that I love, and we're wrapping this up by the way, is that you've done your part, and I think you're doing it. I mean, I kept thinking, when is Stephen going to run for president? I would like to vote for him. And you're like, no, 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 I'm not. I'm like, damn, come on, Stephen. You'd be great. But you have done something in terms of making a huge global impact with regards to the Shift Network. And you've reached millions of people from around the world. And by giving people access to all manner of, I mean, every time there's a program, you offer a free preview, you give so much of it away. So say something about, for anybody on the planet who hasn't heard of the Shift Network, what is something that they should know about how they can get involved or
Well,
participate?
just get on the list, the shiftnetwork.com, and we do our best to bring out the wisest people we know in the world, and there's a lot of different lineages who try to honor teachers and wisdom traditions from every different lineage. We've got qigong teachers and shamans from the highlands of Peru, to Christian mystics, to people are teaching on energy medicine, and some stuff might be further down the rabbit hole than people want to go, like talking to mediumship skills, talking to folks on the other side. We're willing to go to places that a lot of others won't, and so we do some more advanced work like that, and also just stuff that's healing traumas and working through grief. And so the basic principle is we become more like those that we are around. And so if we can have a little more intimacy with the wisest people in the world, we're all going to lift, we're going to lift our game. We're going to be wiser people ourselves. We're going to be more heart-centered. And so for me, it's a blessing to be able to engage with so many wisdom carriers from so many different lineages and traditions. And we just try to make that available to as many people as possible.
And Alyssa, you said something about um, being lucky, being gifted, having the gift of education is part of what has elevated you to be able to be as articulate as you are and be as confident as you are, to be able to go down to talk to your local politicians and express yourself. And perhaps if more people had access, I mean, sometimes people don't, they're not able to get the expensive education that a lot of other people get. But one thing that's cool about what Stephen's doing at the Shift Network is it's everywhere. I mean, almost everybody has access to a cell phone these days. I mean, almost everybody. And in the future, it will be pretty much everyone will have one. And if you have access to the internet, you can go to the Shift Network, for example, and get some of these courses, even if you can't attend a traditional university. Education might be, of all the many, many, many solutions, it might be at the center of the whole thing. When we read a book, when we learn something from a wisdom keeper, we change. Our neuroplasticity rearranges and we become better versions of ourselves. So I'm grateful for your book, Stephen, Sacred America, Sacred World. It's not just Sacred America, period.
Yeah, at first the title first came as Sacred America, but then I was like, it's too focused. And I was like, you know what, this is really about, we're helping to model what the world is moving towards, which is one unified global family where everybody has their role and respected and has a chance to thrive.
What a privilege to get to talk to you, Stephen. So everybody go out, and if you haven't already signed up for the Shift Network, do that. If you haven't already bought 10 copies of Sacred America, Sacred World, go do that.
You're a great advocate. Geez, I should have hired you when I wrote the book.
I know. Well, it's not too late. I think we need a 2.0, like the updated version.
There's some things that are out of date. I got to get back around to it.
But you know what? The principles still hold up. Yeah. So that's what matters most. And Miss Alyssa, I'm expecting that I'm going to get to vote for you one of these days when you put your hat in the ring for, I mean,
she's running. She's running. You can feel it.
You're running, honey, and I'll be your campaign manager.
Wow. Thank you guys so much. I am just so flattered and humbled. Thank you guys so much for your time and just, again, expanding my mind. The things you guys have said and, just learning so much. So I'm so grateful to just have this conversation with you guys today.
Well, it fills me up. I feel filled with hope, and I feel like that gives me the energy to be more on my evolutionary path, or at least be in the curiosity of what's my role to play and how can I do it best. And you two have been a very, very, very special part of that for me today. Thank you so much. Awesome. Everyone go forth and multiply these blessings, and don't take your dreams lying down. Until we meet again, sweet dreams. Thank you for listening to the Kelly Sullivan Walden Show. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends. My show can be found on Apple iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to order my new book, A Crisis is a Terrible Thing to Waste, go to your favorite online or brick and mortar retailer. Then head on over to kellysullivanwalden.com, tragic to magic. Input your order number and redeem your bonus gifts. I'm also excited to be offering a dreamwork practitioner training. So if that calls to you, go to kellysullivanwalden.com/dreamwork. If you'd like to join me for the live recording of these shows, most Wednesdays at noon Pacific, you can find me on Facebook at Kelly Sullivan Walden Dreams. If you have a question about your dreams or about how to transform your tragic into magic, email me at kelly@kellysullivanwalden.com. Until next time, remember, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And as you awaken to the power of your dreams, you make the world a lighter, brighter, more beautiful place, one dream at a time. Sweet dreams.